It is 1 p.m. I'm calling the April 15th, 2024 workshop of the Wenatchee School District School Board to order. Take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, whether you're joining us live on Monday, April 15th at 1 p.m. or if you're joining us via a YouTube presentation. We appreciate you being here today. Thank you for the board of directors who are with us this afternoon. We have a special treat today, and our workshop is around Big Six strategic plan item number 6. And we have Director of Career and Technical Education, Jake Buchholz, with us. And today is going to be a fantastic presentation on not only career and technical education overall, but the work that Jake has put into our career and technical education program over the last 3 years, and his ideas for the future. So we're excited to have Jake with us, and I'm going to let him take it over. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I've come and done different board workshops, and they always feel there's more of a formality to them, right? Or at least that's how I feel. And so my hope today really is that, I don't want to say informal, but certainly a little bit less of a formality. And really it's a dialogue. It's a discussion. Jump in, interrupt me, like let's just have a conversation around what CTE is. These are kind of the topics that we'll go through. And if you have a wondering that's not on that list, ask. Be like, hey, I wondered this, or why do you do that? Or whatever it is. Because we got some good time that finally, I'm excited about, and I want to use it as best as we can for you. So we will go over the following items for sure today. And that is time frame for context. So what we're talking about, and that's really just the time that I've been doing this work, right? I don't necessarily I kind of know some of the stuff from before I was doing the work, but I don't necessarily know a reason or why something was done a certain way or whatever. But we'll talk about CTE funding, a brief overview of what CTE is, and then we'll get into the below CTE funding is really, those are the initiatives that are within CTE, and I'll talk about that as we get there. And those are channeling how we do the work to support the Big Six. And so we'll kind of dive into that. So brief history. So first of all, there's a long history of career and tech ed. It has changed names. In the past, you would hear vocational education, and there was a name change at some point. And with that, and this is something that we'll talk a little bit about and bring up throughout, but just to put it on the table, with a long history of anything comes good and bad. And so sometimes there's some different connotations or some different viewpoints on something that maybe are not true anymore. And so I certainly think that is the case with career and technical education. As the state has changed with the workforce demands, things have gotten a lot more technical, a lot more rigorous. And so our work is to continue to bring that into the classroom. Whereas if somebody is looking through a lens that may be from 20 or 30 years ago, things certainly will look different with the technical demands of whatever the program is. So our focus today, so recent history. So just to kind of put it in context, so 2021, that was the year that we were half the year online. That was my first year in this position. So that year was just really around taking stock, me figuring out, what's happening, who does what, and that kind of thing. And we really look at this in cycles of change. So we work on a 1-year cycle. Now, that doesn't mean we don't plan out farther than that, but we can take action on a 1-year cycle for the most part when it comes to programming.
Jake,
So,
real
yeah.
quick. So does that mean like your budget is annual? So like if you,
Yeah.
so if I say the CTE budget is 100 grand.
Yeah.
Next year, if you don't use that money, you don't get 200 grand. You have to start from scratch a little bit.
Kinda. So our budget is annual, but we have a minimum expenditure. We have to spend 90% of the budget. Right, yeah, it's called recovery. And so recovery goes back to the state. And so we could carry over that 10%, which I try to aim for 5 to 7.5%, because I don't want to end the year at, I don't want to get close at 11% because we underspent and now you're making poor purchases, right? You got to always have a plan of how to be there. So if I can be between 5 and 7.5 with my plan, I'll probably land closer to that 7.5 and feel pretty good. So that's usually what we try to do.
Because it's nice to have a little something in the bucket if you need a little
Yeah.
extra.
Yeah, because for me, if I go over budget, then that impacts the rest of it. That is not anywhere close to what I'm okay with doing. Like, we will not do that. And so we plan accordingly and make sure we have stuff in line that we don't go there. So I gotta try to thread the needle on that.
Right.
So-
And is it annual or is it by the school year? Like, is it like 21 is your funding, the
No,
January,
it's
December?
school year-
the
It's
school
on the
year?
school year cycle. Yep.
Okay.
So, first cycle of change, when we first really got to implement something was 21, 22. Last year was year 2, and we're in the middle of year 3. So there's been quite a bit of change over those cycles, and we'll talk about that. So, overview. So our goal is really to create pathways that are clearly outlined leading to post-secondary credentials. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Family wage employment is huge. I've talked to you guys about that before in the past. We're trying to intentionally equip students to bridge the skills gap. So it is being specific and intentional about the types of skills that they're getting, the training that they're getting that's aligned to industry. And then last, but certainly not least, everything we do with our community is around strengthening the community connections and the partnerships and building professional networks. Skills are one thing that is fantastic. It's important, but then the network to be able to put the skills into play. Who do you know? How do you navigate this industry? A great example, electricians and IBEW and that union process, that can be foreign to a lot of students that are coming out. It's like, well, I don't even know how do I even get signed up at the union? What tests do I take? What credentials do I need to even take the exam when they're screaming for electricians, right? And then are there even slots? Because if you're going to go into that, you got to have an open slot with an employer that will take you on for your apprenticeship. So there's a lot involved, and that's where that network comes into play.
Are you working with like for your example, the union on either developing curriculum or having them as, assistant teachers, or coming in for a day and being like, hey, I'm going to help you work through what this looks like, the apprentices, journeyman, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have, and all of the above. And so we have different systems that will kind of go through different systems in place for each of those discreetly. And so whether it is a classroom partner, or it is a mentor, or it is a member of an advisory board, all of those things take place. So jumping into starting with CTE funding. So how is something even eligible to be funded by CTE? And so first of all, CTE is based on student FTE and CTE courses. So if students sign up for CTE classes, that's what drives the funding for the course. The following must be true. And that is, the course has an approved application under a SIP code. So, and I'll talk about that, what a SIP code is. On the next slide, I have examples, but a SIP code is a 6-digit number, and it's just a code that describes the type of class. So this code can be around animal science and everything related to animal science. So you apply, there's an application that you do for every single course, and that application has a framework that includes industry standards, leadership components, performance assessments, aligned to a career and technical student organization. That's a requirement. We show the alignment to that organization, FFA, FBLA, all that kind of stuff. Advisory approval. The course must be approved by the advisory committee. So we have an advisory committee. I'll talk about that later. And then that is supported by labor market data. So we have to provide the data in the application that says there are jobs in this area. So that has to be true. The teacher has to have a CTE certification. So there's a teaching certification and then there's a CTE certification. And you can have both, okay? You can also just have the CTE certification. So some of our teachers, a great example that I always use is Jake Juckness. He worked at Van Doren as a fabricator for 15 and a half years, was going through their administrative kind of program where they take the best that they have and put them through a program that teaches them all of the components of Van Doren, but highly skilled fabricator, welder, machinist, and he did not go to college at all. So he learned on the job for the last 15 and a half years at Van Doren. Highly skilled. We can certify him through CTE to be a teacher in our classroom. He takes a few courses while he's working, and then he ends up with that certificate that maintains over time. There's good and bad that comes with that. And I'll talk about, I'll just do it now, but the good is you get people that are highly skilled from their industry, right? Whatever the industry is, healthcare, doesn't matter. The challenge is they haven't been in a classroom, right? And so there's things they got to learn with that. So we've put in place some systems within the CTE program with some staffing to support our teachers as we pull them out of industry, because we really value that industry experience.
Because they don't actually have a teaching certificate. Or,
Not a traditional one.
sure.
Yeah.
It's the CTA certification, which probably has a teaching component.
It does.
But it's
It
not
does.
a traditional route to
It's
being
not
a
the
teacher.
traditional route. Yep. And so here, so this is, see, it didn't take me long. So, yeah, that's right. So, but so the next thing is, so they have the certification, which is what's called a V code. And so there's kind of master V codes. That's these ones down here. The only way you get those is you go traditional college route. And you get that master V code, I'll show you here. And that typically unlocks all of the zip codes in that area. It's kind of like almost like a video game. Like you get this zip code or this V code, and you could do any of these zip codes. Up here, these are specific, and it doesn't really matter what they are, but the point is, so this V141000, that's a common one. That's a STEM V code. That allows you to say, so here's a V code, and this is a specific V code based off industry experience. You have 6,000 hours of industry experience. You can only teach these SIPs. So there may be 25, 30 SIPs inside of skill and tech, but this V code only unlocks 8 or 9 of them. And so what you do is you have to figure out what is their industry experience, what V codes can we certify them under, and what SIP codes does that unlock? And then you go back, and that's what the V code matches. So if all of those things are true, we can collect funding for that course.
Question based on funding. Can you be a BLE student taking CTE courses? And if so, how does that work with the funding if it's all based on FTE and CTE courses? Does that make sense?
What kind of student?
A basic education
Oh, a basic
student.
ed student? Yeah, so when a student enrolls in a course, if it is a BEA course, that funding is BEA at that level. If it is a CTE course, it is just funded at that level. So each kid can count for 1.0, right? So up to a 1.0. So if they take one CTE class, that will be 0.18 of that student. The remaining FTE would go to BEA, the 0.18. I have a slide kind of that goes into a little bit of that. So So, types of funding. So there are certain types of funding within CTE itself that gets broken out. So you have the state allocation, which is what you're talking about, and we'll come back to that. Plus you have work site learning. And then you have some federal dollars with the Perkins grant, Perkins Reserve. And then you have OSPI grants that are typically around programming and equipment, which you don't pay for. You could pay for staff. Sometimes they have grants around staffing, but typically not. And then career launch grants are things that are outside of all those systems. So all those things go into the different funding.
Yeah, so when Miranda and I were touring all the middle schools, they kept talking about the CTE grants that were like, here's a new lab bench or here's a new classroom. And like all the teachers seem to have an additional pot of money that was CTE money. Is that the OSPI grant for equipment? Or is that
Not necessarily.
or is that
no.
coming out of your overall pot?
Yeah. So when we get money for CTE, we get enhanced funding, which we'll talk about in just a second. And the reason for enhanced funding is because it's typically very expensive to run these lab-based, shop-based, equipment-based courses. So each teacher or team of teachers has a budget through the CTE office that we manage. And so they have that. These are typically Perkins reserves can be smaller, but these grants are typically much larger. So like, for example, this year we worked with OSPI. We got a couple of those equipment grants, one for around health sciences. And that was about $100,000. No, that's different. Yeah, that was, no, but this is, what we got the grant for health sciences was around the developing of a sim lab for lobotomy and some different things like that. And so, and then the other one was around automation and robotics when we talk about, and that'll come up again. Just in this area with logistics, you think Amazon, you think Crunch Pack, you think everything that ships, all of the fruit warehouses, wineries, all that stuff works off of automation and robotics. And they need people that can work on those lines, program those lines, the robots, so on and so forth. So state allocation, again, based on the student FTE. So there's period FTE, or what we call minutes. So you take your total weekly minutes divided by 1665, that gives you a period FTE. That's like a 0.18. So once you have your period FTE, you multiply that by the students enrolled. So here's an example. A 6-period day is typically a 0.18. Sometimes it could be a 0.17, depending on if they do some other things, like if they were to take, let's say, an advisory period on Mondays, because it's your total weekly minutes. So if it reduces that by just enough, it goes from a 0.18 to a 0.17, and that would change your total for that course. And then you just combine all periods for all courses, and that's your total FTE for that month for CTE. And you'd say, well, why don't you just take all your kids times 0.18? Because not all periods are the same, even within the same building. So for example, right now at Pioneer, you have science classes that might be a 2, but you have, a health science class that's a 0.13 or a 0.14. And so it just depends on the minutes that the students are in that class. And so we do a monthly process every month, first of the month, and we get every single roster. It gets verified by every teacher. And then we go through and do count to verify that our FTE is accurate. So there you go. That averages out over the year.
Do you have to mess with like snow days and that kind of stuff? Like that seems pretty specific. Is
No,
it like
no.
how far down the rabbit hole do we have to go?
Yeah, so the
Yeah,
answer to
right?
that is if it repeats once within a 2-week period. So if it's a regularly scheduled advisory every other week, that will affect your FTE. If it's every 3rd week, it will not affect your FTE. Why? I don't know. Somebody decided that was good.
So with the schedule change for next year, is
Yeah.
that going to simplify a little bit of?
It will. Yeah, it will. It will make it so we don't have different values within the same building. Yeah, that's true. So, and it's at middle school. I mean, yeah, it affects each building a little bit differently, but it will unify it. So people talk about enhancement, and Yes, CT funding is enhanced, and it's enhanced in a couple different ways. I mean, and just to kind of, you'll hear people say 20%, 20%. And yes, I mean, as a ballpark, that's about accurate. So what they do is, first of all, it's based off an average class size of 23 versus BEA that has a higher average class size. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, there's an actual enhancement in the formula that comes out. So, but not everything gets enhanced the same way. So like your teaching staff has a certain enhancement, your classified staff has a different, administration different, your MSOC different. All in all, without going too far down the rabbit hole, it works out to about 20% of an enhancement, maybe a little bit less, 18. So right in there. This is where we talk about monthly count, verification, and then worksite learning. So this is something I think people are not necessarily familiar with. So worksite learning is a program. We have a worksite learning instructor, and their job is to work with community organizations for students that work for them. And so we have student works for Lowe's or whatever, and our instructor works with the manager at Lowe's and the student, and they work and they set goals and they meet periodically through the semester to work on the identified goals, whether whatever it is. It can be, we got students that are moving into management roles at these organizations and so on and so forth. So those hours, if a student works, 100 hours over the course of the month, those 100 hours can be counted. Like we collect FTE off those hours worked. So that provides funding, pretty much enough funding to fund that whole teacher to work with these students.
That's set up by the school or like?
Yeah.
Or do they have to like, I'm gonna go apply at Lowe's, like, hey, I have this job at Lowe's now, can I get some credit for it?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Both. I mean,
they're talking to you at the school, and then they're talking to the business that
Yeah.
they'd like to work at, and then
Yeah.
you guys
Sometimes.
close in the business, then talk about it afterwards.
sometimes, but then other times we'll say, hey, you already have a job. We will work with you and your employer to set into place certain things that you can work on that tie in with your program. And then we go from there. That's capped at a 0.18. So even if they worked a ton of hours, it isn't going to count more than what a regular class would count.
Could they do that over the summer as well?
Absolutely. Yep. And then the last thing about this, so middle school and high school are funded very similarly, but it's technically different formulas. They are funded in different pots and they are kept separate. So middle school stuff pays for middle school, high school stuff pays for high school. So questions on any of this?
Do they, sorry, I thought of
No,
one. Do they, you guys just gonna listen to Jake and I have a conversation?
Yeah, we're good.
I'm gonna take all of your mics. So could you potentially be working outside of school and then you're like a 1.2 FTE? Would that work? I mean, I guess I'm trying to see, it seems like you can
It depends.
add on more for each student than
Yeah,
you
it
could get.
depends. Depends on what they're doing for that 1.2. So there's running start that allows for up to, I think, a 1.4 now. But there's also something called career launch. So we talked about the data center tech program a while back. That's a career launch. Career launch is a special, we didn't even talk about it, but it's a special designation of funding that because we have a career launch program, if a student is in that, we can go up to a 1.2 for that student. So it just kind of depends.
So a student.
And that begs another question. So if a student has let's say next year, junior has a part-time job, they have 6 classes at the high school. Is worksite learning one of their classes? Or do they
It doesn't have to be.
Okay,
We have allowed that in the past because again, if they're not one that can go over the 1.0, then it doesn't necessarily have an impact funding wise.
Gotcha.
Right? I mean, we're still getting funded up to a 1.0.
Yeah.
But if they needed a course for something, we've allowed that, but we've also allowed a student to take usually the last period of the day, right, where they
Okay.
wouldn't have class
Right.
because they're doing it and working at a job. So,
So they could theoretically go to work at 2:30 instead.
yeah.
of Wait till.
Well,
school
and
time.
this is where we get a little creative and some new ideas, right, and moving forward. But as we start talking about later, this idea of job shadow, or not job shadow, but internship hours, like how do you take a student who also wants to be a part of the other great things that high school has to offer? How do you get them into a position to be able to do an internship, whether it's paid or unpaid? Because if you say, well, you got to go to class all day, and then well, I know you want to play basketball, so you'll do that. I mean, pretty soon you'll run out of time in a day, right? And so when we talk about, well, we could do practicum courses, we can do worksite learning courses, and we could free up periods from a traditional base class to an on-site. And we're kind of piloting that right now with our MA program through Confluence, right? So that MA program students are at Confluence for half the day. And they're working with nurse preceptors and going through that whole thing. And they're learning a ton, right? And so different ways to structure, just trying to think outside the box of what could we do differently to learn in an environment that has a high degree of relevancy. So, Perkins Reserve grants, we already kind of talked, I'll skip this. We talked about it a little bit. So all costs are associated with direct staffing and MSOCs are funded through the program, through CT funding. Indirects are taken off the top. So before I see the budget, indirects are out, and that helps support like central office staff, district level staff, big person at the warehouse. Yes, we manage all of the ordering and the processing through the CTE office at the high school, but the physical packaging that comes in, whereas a direct cost, I work with other directors, like, with technology. CTE funds a portion of one of the TSSs at the high school directly for their time that they support CTE staff. So yes, all the funding's there, but all of the costs are associated there as well.
So your MSOC funds are probably a lot higher than the districts. You have like things like you have a welding class, and steel is expensive. Is
Yeah,
that all part of the course?
There's an enhancement on it for sure. I don't know enough of what the district's like, the rate or anything, but there is an enhancement. I know that. And then it's all, even though it's kind of broken out, it all gets bundled together. So the way they've decided to do the enhancement is mainly on the staffing side by staffing units. And it all comes out.
I know we're talking about this budget cuts, we're changing the MSOC, the MSOC that's available.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how it affects these potentially more expensive classes
Yeah.
from a material standpoint.
For us, the formula is working. I mean, I know the formula, it's well enough to where I can plan for what we're getting, I guess, is the best way to answer that. So I feel really good about the position that this formula is in for the state and what the programming we have laid out. So, okay.
I guess jumping in
Yeah.
on that. So does CTE cover its MSOC through its program, or because I know we traditionally adopt that resolution at the end of the year that says our MSOC is going to exceed what the state will give us. Is that exclusive to our basic ed, everything else we run, or is that that I assume includes CTE in every program we have? So does CTE exceed what the state gives us as well as other programs? Does that make sense?
That's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer to that right now, but I can get that to Sean and get that back. I know that Jake does, he does pay for a lot of his MSOC costs as well, but we also as a district take, the majority of all MSOC on. So yeah, I can get that. Yep. That's a good question.
Okay. So these are initiatives. So we have organized the department around specific initiatives that we see, again, tying into the big six. How are we gonna, so the big six is there, whether it's number 6 or number 1 or, you know, whichever number. How is that gonna actually take action steps and get done? And so these are the things that we have decided, this is what we can focus on to make an impact on those items. So first of all, when we talk about instructional programming, so we'll go through all of these. So instructional programming, just for reference, there are 6 program areas at the state level, and we have all 6, and that's what they are. So ag, business, family consumer science, health science, STEM, skilled and tech. Everything is organized into those 6 categories. We have programming at Foothills, Orchard, Pioneer, Westside, and Wenatchee High. So that's what happens here. We have 86 staff members, 66 are certificated, 20 classified, and 1, well, I guess that adds up to 87, but we have 87 staff members if I included myself. I didn't include that at the top one, but I threw the administration in there. So 86 and then me. So you have this document. So that is kind of I mean, it's pretty small writing, and this is really an internal document for us. So each program area is divided into what's called a program of study. So each of these boxes is a program of study. Programs of study are, first of all, required by the state, but we have decided that they need to have a particular set of criteria that they need to meet. The first one is that they're a collection of aligned courses of 4 or more courses. Why is that important? Well, moving into a 6-period day, that means each one is a half a credit. That equals a total of 2 credits, which is what's required for the graduation pathway. So there's a program of study, and there's something else called a graduation pathway. And the graduation pathway is one of 7 pathways that students can use to graduate high school. So every single one of these boxes meets what's called the graduation pathway. So meaning if a student does those 4 classes and they pass them, they will have done that pathway in order to graduate. Now, the reason that is true is because each of these boxes includes classes that are either dual credited or they have an industry recognized certificate. If that was not true, then they would not meet the graduation pathway.
So Jake, if you had someone, you brought the MA example earlier
Yeah.
at Confluence, if they didn't pass the test to be certified to be an MA at the end, would that mean that they don't graduate from high school? Is that like their graduation pathway is not?
It is not, no, it is not tied to passing that exam. The sequence of courses has to lead to the exam. Of course, we want them to.
Sure.
Yeah. And there's other mechanisms like our CNA, when we are for our CNA program through Department of, or the Nursing Commission, they keep track of our stats on what our passage rates are and all that kind of stuff, because that can affect whether or not you're allowed to have the program.
So if they, at some point, the CNA people say, hey, I've noticed that in 5 years, you haven't passed one nurse.
Exactly.
Clearly your program is not preparing these
Correct.
students for this.
And we're pulling your.
And we're
ability
pulling
to
your
have-
funding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, they wouldn't pull funding. They'd pull the license. They would not allow us to do that.
Could you make staff changes and say, or curriculum changes and say, here's the change we've made, we'd
Yeah.
like another shot?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And they could always say no, but there's always that potential.
Right.
We look for sponsoring employers. That's not sponsoring dollar wise. That's just job shadow, mentorship, internship, that kind of stuff. So we have 23 programs of study at the high school, at Wenatchee High School, 7 at Westside. There are 108 CTE courses at the high school level and 16 at the middle school. So just to kind of give an idea of what's going on. This is important. So when we build those boxes, when we put those together, we're trying to identify sectors of the economy or areas that there are stratified entry points. So there's entry, because we serve a lot of different students at Wenatchee High School with a lot of different goals. Some of them are going to go straight to a 4-year and a master's and beyond. Some are going to have other things going on and they need to go straight to work and everything in between. And so whatever we choose, we want to make sure that there are entry points along the way. And you don't, this isn't necessarily designed to read from your spot, but each one of these, this is an entry point, and each one as you move up the ladder is an increase in pay. It's an increase in responsibility. It's an increase in education required. And the idea is, you know, you go in wherever you go in, and then you can move up from there. Healthcare is great for this. You know, you can get, when you get in, now you can earn dollars. And this will come up again later, but you can earn dollars while you are furthering your education, and you can move sideways or you can move, you know, up. So the other thing is that's important is we look to build programming demonstrates how career clusters intersect in a place of employment. For a long time, you heard follow your passion, you know, work with what you're passionate about. And that is awesome. I would never tell somebody not to do that. The caveat is, can it pay the bills? And so both of those things, if you could do both, that's ideal. If you can't do both, then you better figure out which one's more important. Or where if we can expose students to different options, they can see, hey, I can work in an area of strength that's adjacent to an area of passion. So within a field that I'm passionate about, I could take the strengths that I have that command a higher dollar amount, and I can put those into practice to support the thing I'm passionate about. So it's just a little different take to make sure that they understand how all these things are interconnected, because they are. Every industry you go into, you see all kinds of different sectors, you know, come together and meet around the goal of that organization.
Jake, how receptive are you? Like, I think of myself in high school, and this would have been just like way over my head.
Yeah.
Like, I have to get a job.
Yeah,
Like,
I know,
that's
right?
not, I was a lifeguard,
Yeah.
you know, like that
Yeah.
was not a permanent job.
Yeah.
Some people made it a permanent job, but like, you know, this is, I think, incredibly useful, and like, and very much like, let's look at your life after this and be intentional about how you're preparing for that. But like,
But you're 16 also.
but you're 16 and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I was,
and
I
that-
don't,
Yeah, you're nailing it on the head. I mean, it's not easy. It's not like I can go into a classroom and just say, all right, kids, here's this, and everybody's walking out and it's like, yeah, got the plan. I'm not naive. Like, I know that, you know, and so it's like, all right, so how do we do that, right? And we'll talk about our plan for that a little bit down the road. I don't want to spoil it, but not that that'll work 100%. I want to be super clear. Nothing I say is going to work 100%. That's for sure. So it just is what it is. But if we can make a dent, right? If we can move us forward, that's our goal. All right. So instructional development. We talked about framework development. Again, they all have to be state approved before we can offer the course. Just as a reminder. So our model, we really try to wrap several things in. So we have a theory, we have classroom instruction or a theory-based instruction, but that needs to be coupled with hands-on. Want me to run over here, Liz? That needs to be coupled with shop, lab, hands-on instruction. And then there's extended learning through career and technical student organizations. So those things have to be present if we're going to call something a CT class, which is all wrapped up in the stuff that we already talked about earlier, but just a different visual. It's all there. So dual credit IRCs. So 68 of these courses offer an industry recognized certificate. 23 of them are articulated for a total of 132 college credits, whether that's through Wenatchee Valley or Big Bend or Central. So we'll have more on the line next year as far as the articulation for dual credit. Okay. What is dual credit? It is an umbrella term, first of all. So there are multiple types of dual credit. So dual credit is a course that receives high school credit and college credit. That is different than a cross credit. Cross credit is different credit types within a high school. So science also counts for health, or health counts for science, for example. Dual credit programs. We have 4 at Wenatchee High School, or Wenatchee School Districts, I should say. So Running Start, college and the high school, CT, dual credit, and AP. We do not offer IB or Cambridge Institute. but those are the 4 that we have. So this is a little bit about why we have dual credit, trying to kind of build this case. I showed very similar graphs to you the last time I was here around the data center tech program. So what percent of students enrolled in the first year after graduation? So 4-year, going to a 4-year straight out of high school, historically, we have bounced around the 25% mark in this district. 2-year was around the 35% mark. Pandemic happened statewide. CTCs saw a drop in enrollment. We're hovering around the 20% mark. We typically used to be around 40% would go into the workforce or not on the post-secondary. And after the pandemic, we're right around that 57, 58, 59%. Putting that into context, that's about how many students we're talking about every year.
Is this all students from high school or is this just your CTE program?
This is all students. This is all students. This is Wenatchee School District data from the ERDC. So that major shift that we saw in the pandemic has persisted. So the slides I'm showing you right now are from a presentation I did at the high school a couple weeks ago to the staff. Just again, like how are we going to move forward from where we're at right now? Attainment level. So that was who went on, right? So now what's the attainment level? 8 years after graduation, bachelor's or higher, 27%. Okay. Ish, average. Associates, 16%. No post-secondary certificate, right? Didn't finish something within 8 years. About 55% of the students. Okay. We're just laying the foundation here. There's just.
So,
Yeah.
so am I reading it right? Like 25% we're pursuing a 4-year degree and 27% actually ended up getting one.
Yep. Yep. And you think, well, some of them came from here, right? So they went here first.
Right. And then
they
kept
went
going.
on. Yep.
Yep.
But this drop is
Right.
mostly this increase, right?
Right.
So we have 2 big sets of data, 2 big sets of groups, 2 big sets of kids that we're talking about. And that's ones that start and don't finish, and then ones that don't start at all, right? Those are the 2 biggest sets that we're really talking about.
So it seems like, and this is just me trying to wrap my head around this.
Yep.
We're trying to address that by saying, okay, if 60%, just to use a round number,
Yep.
is not going to pursue or achieve a secondary education, how do we push our educational model toward servicing those 60%,
Yes,
as
yes
opposed to
and
like,
no.
how do we get those bachelor's or higher numbers up?
Right, because yes and no, because and this is where some of the past thinking around CTE comes in. I'm here as a CTE director, I understand that. But our goal, and I want to be very clear, is students must have post-secondary. What I will not say is all students have to have a bachelor's, because that just is not true in the workforce today. It is also not true or not a good idea to use this number to say, well, shoot, bachelor's makes a lot more. Everybody should get a bachelor's. No, it depends on what the bachelor's is in. Like that is key. But what I will not say is that you'll hear this. Well, not everybody needs to go to college. Well, that has been morphed into, I don't need to go to college. And you have parents repeating that. Students are repeating that. That is not accurate. We need people to go to post-secondary. What we don't need is everybody with the bachelor's. But this is an important graph because it's juxtaposing this percentage of students that we have with 16 years after graduation, the median income. And this is our self-sufficiency standard. Self-sufficiency standard is different for there's a ton of, it takes every situation and gives a different number. So I just picked one adult, one child. So single parent. you need that much to be self-sufficient in Chelan County. And that's your median income if you only have a high school diploma. So our goal, so here's the post-secondary decline. Reframing. We have 60% not going on. We are not different than anybody else in the state of Washington. Okay. But Washington State needs 70% getting a post-secondary credential. So 60% are not going. We as a region and a state need 70% getting something. So we have the gap. So this was all about, we have the gap. So now what, right? That's the work we're doing. Questions so far?
I would say, so if you think of something like we talked about electricians earlier, right? I feel like you've gone on, you're an apprentice, you're a journeyman, you're whatever the next one is. That is not caught in this post-secondary.
They need this post-secondary credential would be an apprenticeship, a journeyman card. It would be
Got it. That, so it does include that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's very important because we need.
Because I was gonna say, like,
skilled labor.
Yes, skilled labor is super important, but if you're just saying it's not a 4-year degree, but you're saying you're capturing that because it is some kind of certification.
Correct, because, and that's the frame of mind, is it's not 4-year, it's post-secondary. There are lots of options along the way, on-ramp, off-ramp, for people to move up. And we'll get into that here in a second, but so research and beliefs. So 60% are not going on, right? We need 70. I keep repeating that. You say, well, why aren't they going? Like, do they not believe in it? Research says they do believe in it. Students that are graduating know it would be better to go on, and they're still not. So why? When you look at Gen Z, so look at 24 and below, okay? This is not the 40-year-old who's changing careers, right? That's going back. This is 24 and below. Why aren't you going? Number one answer is cost. And it's not just direct cost, because people say, well, there's scholarships. Yeah, that can help with direct cost, but it doesn't necessarily help with indirect opportunity cost, right? If I am in school, I'm not at work. And I need to work because I need to support family, X, Y, or Z. Or I have to work. That option cannot leave, right? Cannot be off the table. So my only option is to work and do school, which means stress level gets to a point where they say, not really an option for me. So these are the things where we talk about on-ramp, off-ramp, and value proposition. So is the value proposition great enough to say, and right now, like I'm graduating, I can't go do 2 years. Like I can't give up 2 years of working, but I can do 6 months, or I can do 4 months. So how do we move them as far enough along into that post-secondary credential where the value proposition improves, so they say, yeah, I'll go finish. So the vision is to use strategic use of dual credit opportunities. So this is all wrapping back. There's a reason we did all this, wrapping back around the dual credit, right? So they need to line up directly with post-secondary credentials. So we have to have that first, and then we move them as far into that pathway as possible. And this is just kind of some data that supports it. So 67% of students who took dual credit courses enrolled in post-secondary, compared to 39% that didn't. So there's about a plus 30 delta if you're getting into dual credit courses in class or in high school, for you to say, yeah, I have enough, I'll move on.
Does that include Running Start?
Yeah, any form of dual credit. And the answer is really probably a mix of all, right? Of all the ones that any district has, which for us is those 4 different types.
This is, I don't even know where this fits in. And Corey, this might be for you too. Like, are there 5th-year seniors like if you were saying I'm in this CTU program, I wasn't able to get through like all the things in one of these boxes. I need 8 more credits next year to do that. But I've finished 4 years in high school. Is that an option, right? If we're looking at ways that we can that they can receive training essentially for free or paid by the state, is there a way that we can do that, knowing that it would, if we're full at the high school? Yeah, exactly.
Extended so that they can get their degree.
Right.
They have not met their graduation. Yeah, sometimes that would necessitate them doing some summer work after their graduation year. Other times it could be finishing up at Westside.
Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
So lining up directly with post-secondary, that can be short certs, it can be different AAs, whether it's a DTA.
I have
Sorry.
kind of a random
Julie,
question.
Just jump in there, sorry.
No, sorry, it's just kind of random. And again, I don't know where this one fits either, but are we seeing any downside to this program approach? Because you alluded to it earlier that I'm 16, I don't have any idea what I want to do. And now you're going to put me on this one track program where I'm going to get a degree and I'm going to be certified as an electrician by the time I'm 18. But
Yeah.
what if I'm 20 and decide this is not for me?
Right. So there's a 2-step answer to that. So the first thing, when we look at this here, a student can take classes from anywhere on this sheet. They can bounce around to 8 different boxes if they want to and graduate high school. That is not a problem. That's typically what would happen, right? High school was an exploratory time. Take this, take that, kind of into this, maybe I'll take it again. That can still happen within this system. There's nothing wrong with that. Typically, a family or a student that does that kind of has they kind of have a plan a little bit, not knowing exactly what they want to do, but they know they're going to go on, right? They're exploring some stuff, they're trying it out. Not a problem at all. So that's kind of the first answer. The second answer is, if a student does choose, say, coming into high school and 10th grade, and they're like, I think I want to do engineering, and they take 2 classes in engineering, and they're like, that's terrible. I don't like that. I don't want to do that. Well, right. It's better they find out now, right? So that's first, but they could jump into another, well, I think I'm going to go for criminal justice. Okay, great, cool. Going, and they're like, that's terrible, right? They could keep doing that, and that's okay. And then the third is, let's say they do complete one, which are, we tried to make them somewhat specific, but still have some variety within them, to where a student, even if they did complete them, and they graduate high school, they have their diploma, and they're in a 2-year college or a 4-year college. They're like, I don't want to do any of that. Like, well, they still graduated, they still learned some great stuff, and it's okay. And so I think there's kind of multiple levels to it. The biggest thing is they are not locked in to any of this. It's just 60%, right? When we look at them, how do we structure in a way that lowers the barrier towards the network creation and moving into something beyond high school? I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, it's helpful. I think it sort of, what I'm taking from it is it means they're unlikely to maybe come out with the degree like they would have if they focused in a track, but they'll still have the exposure, have the ability to change. So
Absolutely.
it will be more on them to then push themselves the next step to get the certification or the degree in something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you look at one of these and it's like, well, I mean, and whether or not they do enough in high school to get a particular degree, whether it's a short cert or even an AA, is going to depend on so many individual choices. And if they choose not to do this one thing X, and now they're one class away, hey, that's, again, value proposition, right? If you're 18 classes away, it's a lot different than being 1, 2, or 3 classes away. And you don't have to complete that degree or that cert. That's not what we're saying. So kind of taking that approach.
So a follow-up to that then, are we really engaging with counselors then at that senior level saying, hey, you are super close to getting this, almost to your point, like you've got enough to graduate, you don't have a certification. what are we doing to like really push these kids to go finish?
Yeah, great questions. I was gonna make a joke, but great questions. I have the same questions, right? So we have an idea that I'm going to share with you of what we're trying to do around that. So remember, we are in our third cycle of change. I want to bring us back to that. So these things we're trying to put in place, and some of these things, you guys, like what we're talking about right here, is not just a CTE thing. Like we are trying to take somewhat of a lead on it because we have a good understanding of industry and how all these things tie together. But this is really program wide for our high school students. But we'll come back to that because I'll talk about how that ties in. This is just an example. So DTAs, they're used to transfer to a four-year university. Believe it or not, the DTA itself is not a marketable degree. I mean, it is, I mean, it just isn't. I mean, it's good to move on, but in and of itself is not something that they're hiring for. But then there's other ones. There's like 18 or something different AASs or ATSs. And then here's an example of all these short certs are stacked inside of this AAS. So students complete courses at Wenatchee High School. They may get 3 of these short certs ticked off so that when they graduate high school, they could continue employment while they keep working towards their AAS. So that's the idea of short certs and stackable certifications.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I think I've brought it up before, and just for clarification, I understand with the DTA that's transferring to the four-year university, but when you have some students that have the Associate of Applied Sciences and Technical Science, I asked because I went through this before, and they want to go to a different university, maybe not such as like Central. Are they being aware that most or some of those credits will not transfer, and they may have to petition to say this classes is equivalent to what I already had taken rather than
Yeah.
retaking those classes?
And that is 100% true. And we are not there. I mean, we're in the infancy, right? Like this is the plan. But when we get to that point, that absolutely has to be a part of the advising process. And then on the flip side, we have students that are doing a DTA because that's kind of all they know, but they really aren't planning on going to a four-year. And they'll get done with it and they're like, oh, I gotta go back and do more of this or whatever. So the advising piece is critical in this whole thing. We talk about how are we going to bridge this gap to post-secondary. It comes down to advising, counseling, whatever word you want to use, and that process and what does that look like. So could not agree more. Career connected, we will come back to that. That is later on. We'll come back to it. Career connected learning, this is one of our initiatives. Really have tried to expand the opportunities at the middle school and the high school level over the last couple of years. Our goal this year was to increase our take rate through a streamlined approach, put together a different team, the way that we present the information, and the way we get kids signed up to go. So middle school experiences, we had a pretty decent jump. Total experiences across middle school from last year to this year, so that was good. And then at the high school level, almost doubled, which I'm pretty proud of that one. High school, you typically, it's more student choice driven. Like middle school, you could say, all right, everybody, we're getting on the bus, right? But at high school, yeah, you got to convince them, you know, and so to kind of almost double, that's pretty good, right? That's total experiences, which happen in pretty small groups for the most part. So that's good. So if you can't see, almost 3,000 total student experiences from our high school students from at least 768 different kids.
So if you have like someone from the unions here to tell you what it's like to be an electrician, is that included in this, or like this Dan Gamahurst will tell you what it's like to be a writer?
Yeah, so some guest speakers are included in
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
okay.
So guest speakers, job shadows going out, career fairs, field trips over to UW, Boeing, Aerotech, whatever it might be. So those types of things. Yep. Just some different stuff that you guys might be interested in. So CNA clinicals this year, med assistant program. We have 5 students with Confluence right now. Next year we have 15 signed up. So that's a great thing. First high school in the state to be doing that. There are some tech centers doing it already, but we'll be the first high school. Emergency medical technician. So EMT program, we're piloting with 6. Next year we have 20 signed up. They go out on their ride-alongs this week. This is kind of a goal telling Corey. Crazy, but pretty cool. So they are they're cleared for CPR, and so that means they're in the CPR rotation with these medics this week. So that's pretty awesome with Lifeline and Ballard.
Could they then be at school, like a resource at school? Like someone goes down the hallway and they're like, that's right,
I would hope
I'm in the
so.
pool.
I hope so, but anyway, yeah, pretty cool, pretty cool. We have our sports med program that's going along. This was a worksite learning I talked about earlier. We have about 31,000 hours total worked from 100 students over the course of this year with over 70 local businesses. So, student leadership, these are all the different CTSOs we have. We have about 252 students in all of the different CTSOs participating in regional, state, and national competitions. Some pictures. So middle school, you guys saw we did some of the middle school this year with Skills USA was good. Partnerships. So we talked about 70 local businesses. That's one area of partnership. Advisory. So we have an advisory model. We talked about every course has to be approved. So we have program specific advisory. So every program, ag, business, the 6 program areas we talked about, those all have an advisory committee. And then I have a general advisory committee that I meet with. And so we have 78 community members that are not school district employees that are members of these advisory committees. So we have our businesses, we have 78 individuals that are representing industries and organizations to meet with us. And they talk to us about our facilities. They talk to us about our curriculum, staff certification, approved courses, what's coming down the line, what do we need to look for, labor market skill requirements, those types of things. This is what you were asking about, Tucker, is just kind of guest speakers, guest speakers and stuff like that. So these are what we call classroom partners. And so we have 107 different individuals or businesses at the high school level and 69 at the middle school level that are what we call our classroom partners. So really we've got, again, kind of worksite learning, we've got advisory, and we got classroom partners. And just to kind of, can't put them all on one slide, but just to kind of get an idea of the breadth and the different groups that have been partners for us at some point or another this year. There's a list. So
So all of these are either advisory partners or classroom partners.
these are all just classroom partners.
These are all classroom partners. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't put the advisory members up there, but yep, just classroom partners. Yeah, so which is good because every single one of these is an individual that values what we're doing in our schools. And so that's a positive thing. Julie, did you have a question?
Yeah.
I'm looking at your hand.
How does curriculum adoption work in a CTE setting? Because we have these rigid processes for basic ed, but
Yeah.
clearly we have a lot of options here. We as a board haven't particularly approved any particular thing. So how does that work? What we're going to offer, what the scope is, and who has a say?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mainly it's through advisory committees when they say, hey, we have this industry coming along and we need this. And then we develop a framework, we get it approved by the state. And then we meet with a member of cabinet, Heidi, currently, for the approval of those courses. And then we go from there. So I don't know if that's.
Framework.
Sorry, the framework.
The
yeah.
framework and the industry drive what the curriculum and what the class teaches.
Yeah, so when we have the framework that's identified with the standards, then we'll go and find a curriculum that meets it, that is able to be maintained and updated. So a good example is like with this data center tech program, right? So that's all driven by the CompTIA certifications. So we have worked with CompTIA, which is the certification organization, and a company called Test Out that develops curriculum for the CompTIA certifications. So we've identified that as a curriculum to use for those certifications. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I think the challenge, when I think about that, it's like, the challenge can be sometimes the speed at which we need to move to match industry can get bogged down in our 1 year cycle. If we miss a cycle, now we're 2 years, 3 years, removed, which means, and I have a slide at the end, right? So you hear this stuff about Helion or Amazon coming in or whatever, and this company wants to be online in 2028. It's like, okay, so 2028, that's this year's 8th graders. So what is our 8th grade student coming into Wenatchee High School next year going to have for programming? And what programming will lay out in front of them for the next 4 years? So they walk out the door ready to move into some of these industries. So that's kind of the stuff, just thinking that way. Transitions. So this is where we're talking about advising, right? So one of the things that we started working on and looking at the 21-22 school year was, how do we improve transition from 8th grade into 9th grade? And we got into a new program called School Links. We started it at 8th grade. We started with our exploration trips for students to kind of get an idea, what are they interested in? We expanded School Links down into 7th grade in 22-23, and we started with targeted exploration trips based off of School Links data. What are they interested in? Career cluster. 23-24. Now we started targeted planning for 8th grade because now you have a 7th grader, now an 8th grader. Now we start planning towards that 9th grade year. And then next year, we will roll out our college and career success team, which is kind of what we're talking about. How do we do this transition? So the college and career success team has 2 main priorities. The front end and the back end are 2 transitions, the 7-8-9 transition and the 11-12 post-secondary transition. 7-8-9 transition is really just to identify areas of interest and explore options. And this was, to your point, Julie, they are not locked in, but it can provide relevancy with the programming choices that they make in 9th grade. Develop a plan, better understand high school scheduling, and just kind of go from there. Whereas on the back end, what we have not had really to date is, how do we move to a system of a warm handoff with our local CTC? So Wenatchee Valley College or potentially Big Bend, depending on what it is, but mainly WVC. So supporting that warm handoff, working with students and families. It's personal or small group meetings that, again, are occurring at 7, 8, 9, but they're also occurring with 11, 12, and to that post-secondary. An example that I give, so we have a drafting program, a drafting and graphics program. And so Arius, who's at the college, right? So we might take our 15 students, this team of 5 people, we'll take our 15 graphics students or drafting students, get your portfolios, guys. We're going to go meet with Arius. Thursday afternoon, they go over and they sit down with Arius for 30 minutes. And we're giving high fives, right? And Arius is like, yeah, that's great work. I like how you did that, right? It's a warm handoff. Now, I'm a student who's had no family go to college. I've never stepped foot on Wenatchee Valley campus. And I'm meeting with an advisor for a program. I know him. He says, yeah, let's sign you up for this. Let's get you in this class. I see you already know how to do X, Y, and Z. And so I'm a lot more likely to take that big scary step into something I don't know. And so the same is true on the industry side. So we talked about electrician, we talked about IBEW, the challenges there. Same thing. This college and career success team meets with the family. This direction we want to go. What kind of processes and paperwork do we need to do? Let's get those started. And we're really looking to hand that off. So we have 5 individuals dedicated to this work starting next year. So that's the idea when we start talking about, how do we do this, right? I mean, and I think sometimes we can overcomplicate it, and we can try and get in our own way of trying something, and this may not work. So, but it'll work better than doing nothing, right? And so that's what we're going to do. And so I'll just say that. Questions or thoughts?
I would just add that in the conversations that you have with students, there's such a gamut of the type of students that you are working with at the high school level, from when we talked about who we may have been at 16 versus students that are very much driven and know exactly what they want to do based
Yeah.
on some of the learning that they're doing on the front end.
Yeah.
And they're learning in 7th and 8th grade what they could plan for. And of course, their ideas and passions may change, but
Absolutely.
they come into 9th grade and like, I've got a plan. I need to do this, this, and this. I would love it if people would kind of just step out of my way and help me get to where I want to go to.
Yeah, and you do, and you have all of it, right? And
Yeah.
so, and then we still have our college mentor program. I mean, that doesn't go away. That's on top of this, but it really is just around trying to meet with and understand. And so, because you talk to a student in 9th grade or even in 8th grade, when we talk about back to here, direct communication with the family at that 7th and 8th grade level, and you're getting a flyer at home that's driven towards all the engineering programs, because that's what your son or daughter marked on the thing in the conversation they had. And you're like, since when are you interested in engineering, right? Like, and it's like, hey, if this is wrong, according to the conversations you've had, because this has to be a two-way thing. And so it's really opening up the two-way communication around, do you believe this is right for your child, or is this a surprise? And if it is a surprise, let's dive into it. If it's right on, awesome, we'll keep doing that work. So it's trying to open that up. And that's right here. So there will be direct communication with all 612 program or all 612 families regarding program options, but there will be direct two-way communication with our 7th and 8th and our 11th and 12th concentrators. Yeah.
Jake, I'm thinking, you're talking about communication with families. And what made me think about was, so oftentimes I think our demographics here are, there's probably majority are now 2nd generation, 1st generation, immigrant families, and family connections is really, really important. And more so as kids are in 11th, 12th grade, because I think with the cost of living in this valley, there, the numbers demonstrate that there's an urgency for people to get to work because they got to survive.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, I'll use, my ethnicity as Latino families, because there's such importance of starting to earn money right out of high school. Parents don't really see it as a value because it's more about the immediate need. And so are we engaging families at, like you talk about going to the college and meeting areas, and I can just see it. A student comes home really excited about their connection with the college, being on campus. And then there's that secondary part where it's a student talking to mom, dad, or both.
Yeah.
And then there's that.
Well, this team, if we're doing what we plan to do, if it works the way we think, this team is having that conversation side by side with that student, with the family.
Okay.
Because the student isn't going to have all the information like what I just shared with you. They don't know any of that. And it's not like we got to work on the messaging and how we do this, because what we don't want is we don't want it to become across as we know better than you and we're going to tell you what you need to do with your child. But it also needs to come across as we're a resource all together around the round table to talk about options. And that way you know what they are and you know the pros and cons. And then we have to allow the family to make that decision, right? But they got to have all the info. And that's the job of this team.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Again, it's, lack of knowledge, understanding, and that sense of urgency to get into the workforce without seeing the benefits of being enrolled.
Absolutely. And then lastly, kind of as we, to Julie's point earlier around like, how are we coming up with some of these classes and what is our process and all that? But it's part of it, as I mentioned, was responding to the market and planning and trying to plan 3, 4, 5, 6 years out. And so this is just a slide I was talking about. So one area of growth for us is in energy production and management. I had the fortunate opportunity to go to the Clean Energy Expo back in December, heard the presentation from Helion as well as many others in the solar, wind, gravity, fusion, fission space, a couple others, and then the storage, right? So this is production, but what's the storage look like? And that's huge here with our PUD. The power increases, data centers, mitigating the flows of the river, both seasonally, but even daily. And how are we managing that? Well, people have to work at all those places with the highly skilled and technical skills. So just an example, current 8th grade class, like I talked about earlier. Health sciences will continue to be an area that we grow. Medical assistant and EMT we piloted. We will continue with that. Surgical tech and phlebotomy are two things that the healthcare world is looking for right now, and that does shift and change. And we have to be the counterweight to some degree, right? Like we have to change with industry, but we cannot change as fast as industry. We know that. So we have to change in a thoughtful way that keeps up somewhat, but we are not jumping all over the place either. We don't have the ability to do that. Data center tech, you guys are familiar with that program and that grant. We're working there. And then automation robotics, Amazon logistics distribution, Department of Fish and Wildlife partnership around native species rehab. That's one where they are interested in working with us around growing, harvesting the seed from native plants because they have to be hardened to this area. We grow them and then we contract with them to come and take them and replant them after fires. So those types of things, everything's around what do we need to do for the market in this regional area, but also we do look statewide too at some of the regional needs.
So Jake, I saw that one of your previous slides, you're talking about partnering. I think it was on the advisory partners.
Yeah.
Partnering with Eastmont.
Yeah.
So how much of this stuff is CTE for both sides of the river, and how much of this is Wenatchee does this different or better, or we have these programs and they have those programs?
Well,
How can I market this, Jake? If you could take the fifth on that one too, if you like.
Yeah, I am not one. I'm not one to say that we necessarily do anything better. I mean, I won't really ever say that. I mean, I am proud of.
They have similar programs. They're doing similar things, and they're doing their own way.
They do not have the breadth of programming that we have. I would say that they have some of the same programs. We do have a significant amount more. And a significantly larger presence in the community with our advisory and our services around the CTE department are much further down the road in development.
Could I get a side-by-side graph at a school board meeting, please? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I am. I mean, I will say I am proud of the work that the team has done. I will never say that we're done. I already told you, Nothing that we do will work 100% of the time. But what we will do is try it and we'll adjust and we'll keep going and we'll try again every time. So that is all that I have, unless you guys have other questions.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind going one back to the one where you have health sciences and the data center.
Yeah.
With the medical assistant program and the EMT, and then in the future, potentially surgical tech and phlebotomy, are those, do you know, I'm sure the frameworks still need to be built and curriculum aligned, but from my understanding, the surgical tech and the phlebotomy, there's not a ton of post-secondary that is necessary. That's a lot of
Right.
on-the-job training
Yeah,
when you get
well,
the jobs, right?
All of these,
Yeah,
well, I am not as familiar, I don't want to, I guess I shouldn't say anything about these because I'm not 100%. You are right in that there is not necessarily a ton. I don't want to act like I know all of it on those two. These two, I can tell you that it is 100% possible for a student to leave our system with those licenses. And so, and then the goal is that anything we cannot get a license in, that we get them significantly down the road. Back to the slides we were talking about, it's all about value propositions. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Because the value proposition in some of those could be that eventually a student could leave the high school ready to go in some of these programs if they had that passion and that drive
Yeah.
and found success in that
well,
area.
and some of them, even if, I mean, it's not like, some of them don't take that many classes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You already got to be in a science class anyway. You
Yes.
know, so you know what I mean? Like, I don't want people to look at these boxes and think that these are all on top of other types of credits. I mean, there
You're
are
picking
many
off your
less credited
electives.
classes in
Yeah.
there. Like some of those will
Fair.
count as your science
Yep.
class.
You're picking off
Yeah.
requirements
Yeah.
and electives as you're going, and
Yeah.
it's just adding up to
That's right.
potential
Yeah.
degrees. Yeah.
How many of them can you take together? You know what I mean? Like you look at, like when I was going through college, you're like, oh, you have to take these 3 classes to take that class. So I was like, whoa, wait, so I can't take that class until my junior year? Like,
Right,
so how many
yeah.
of these can you take concurrently?
That it
Very
really
dependent on the
does
box.
depend on the box.
Yeah.
I mean, but we tried to build them as much as we could, there are some boxes that are very clearly sequenced, but we tried to stay away from sequencing if we could, because in or in any high school schedule for that matter, sequencing really starts to lock down what a student can do in their schedule. So if we could, we got away from it. You know, just talking about certificates, like this is all based off kind of 4 different CompTIA certs, but ITF is in IT fundamentals, A+ is a CompTIA cert, Network Plus and Security Plus. And those are all 4 where a student could potentially, I mean, it'd be hard to get all of them, but they could, you know, and even if they got 2, you know, even with A+, there's companies that are like, yeah, we'll hire somebody with A+, you know, and that's the second of the 4. So,
And we can get you 3 and 4 down the road.
yeah, or, yeah, exactly. You know, and that's the thing. So,
Fantastic, Jake. Thank you so much. Any other questions or thoughts for Mr. Buchholz?
I don't know if this is a Corey or Jake question, but in thinking about our enrollment decline situations, there's a lot of really great options here. And I know basic ed and CTE are a little bit separate, but are there ways that we can leverage our CTE to help incentivize our basic ed enrollment to the extent you can kind of take some of these classes? Or does it become the problem where everyone wants to take the electives, so we can't?
Well, you have to do both. Like if you are enrolled in the school, you have to do both. So these programs bring in people. They also take our BEA classes. So you can't be 100% BEA. So it's kind of like these, you're spot on. These do drive our enrollment. And whether it's CTE funded or BEA funded, the normal high school student's going to have both. In fact, they're probably going to be heavier in BEA than CTE, except maybe in certain cases.
Okay, maybe this is the same thing, but I'm thinking more like, okay, so there's a law and justice class. Are there 6 of those classes? If we like push one box heavily, are we gonna run into like, sorry, only Mr. Hart teaches that? So, and he is one person, and so I can't push this box to 100 people because I just can't, there's not enough spots for that.
Right. So we do run into some limitation, like, for example, with Ruben. We right now are serving quite a few of those students that want that. But I think I want to jump back to Julie's question, because I think from my perspective, again, I'm biased, but I am proud of the programs. And I think if we do this work well from this team, and we continue on the, the blitz of publication that we have put in place for CT, and we get more families to know about these programs as we develop them, it will bring families into the district, at least at the high school level. And if we can expand into the middle school level with some creative thinking and some creative options, it's a way, I think, to lay the foundation to get families in at the middle school level, and they grow, and then they will be in an English class and, on top of these programs. But we've got to do a really good job in making sure the community knows what we have, what we can offer, and how it will move them, down the line. And so I think it's all tied together. But are we going to run out? Well, we can always hire, in CTE, I could say, you know what, that law and justice track, we got 200 kids that want it. We're going to go find another Mr. Hart. Well, there's no other Mr. Hart, I'm okay. But I mean, you get the idea, right? Like, and that's what we do with advisory. They're like, look, there really isn't much of a future in this, right? So we will collapse the program. Like, it's got to have a market value, but looking out, right? We can't do year-to-year changes.
Like you said, chasing something, but
Yeah.
it seems like a lot. So we're like,
Yeah.
we're recording this thing in Nevada. Let's
Yeah.
build a program around that. Like,
Right.
oh, then it comes.
Yeah,
Right, right.
exactly. So, the things like this Helion and some of these other, like some of the foundational tech skills that it takes to work in those environments are all they're translated to our fruit packing sheds, logistical companies, data centers, IT companies, Confluence, right? Because they have a whole IT department. They have a whole HVAC crew. Like, all of those things are all over. So it's good.
Just quick question. I think we can all benefit from the adulting class in culinary arts. Not just kidding.
Sure.
How does this compete with the skill center?
Yeah, good question. We try not to compete. As far as compete, we do try to have a, where something that, say, I do will lead into something that Pete's doing out there. We made a strategic decision to move CNA out there, but keep CNA at the high school. And the reason for that was, that's probably one of the only ones where we truly have a same program. And the reason for that was we were full at the high school, and we were pulling Eastmont students over for that because they don't have it. We said, let's put CNA there. Eastmont can go there. I can keep this program full. He can fill that from Kashmir, Aniak, so on and so forth. And so that's going to be the goal for him. I don't have as much to do with that once it's out there.
Based on the need.
Yeah, based on the need. I mean, and I just don't know, because I don't, I was just saying, I don't work with the tech center. I mean, I work with them, but not like decisions.
And I'm just thinking, let's keep the FTE here. And nothing against Petey. I like Pete.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think there's programs over there that we don't offer, like, say, automotive.
Yeah. And we're not really supposed to compete. I mean, so for me to go and start a whole automotive program isn't really what we're supposed to do. Yeah. So it's unique with the CNA thing, because we both knew what the plan was, that we were going to keep them both, but that's unique.
So, sorry, is the skill center not district FTE? Are they their own thing?
We do get FTE from the Skill Center.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right.
Yep, Technical Skill Center. So
So you-
when Eastmont students come to.
We get Eastmont FTE.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah,
I
and
was
so,
like,
and that
oh.
was part of the reason, so
That-
when,
Yeah, because they're coming to a consortium school, then while they're at the skill source, then we do get that FTE. So we get, and it's an enhanced FTE, so we can get up to 0.7 FTE for this skill center.
Because they're doing their math or English or whatever back at Eastmont.
Right.
But if they're taking up to 0.7 at the skill center, that therefore every point, whatever,
yeah,
is going toward our district.
right.
Correct.
So when those students were coming to Wenatchee High for the CNA program, it was the same, it was a shared program. We got that FTE from Eastmont for that block of time, all based on those minutes that we talked about. So in making the decision to move it out there, it was taking into account, well, we still want to keep that over here. Because, I mean, it was two things. One, we want those kids to have the opportunity. And that was the biggest thing, was how do we increase the opportunity in healthcare in our valley? By doing that, then I had the opportunity to keep CNA, add medical assistant, and surge tech and EMT, right? So we're expanding these options for students, so.
And to Maria's point, there, it allows Wenatchee High School students to take Wenatchee High School offered classes without competing with anyone out there.
Yeah,
so-
yeah,
So now we have two programs, so we can fit the need for the entire community, which is not a bad thing.
because for some like that, for the CNA class or the EMT, they can do that at different times throughout the day without having to give up a whole half a day. So some students are like, yeah, I don't want to go for a half a day. I want to plug it in the second period and do it right over time. And so that's an interest of theirs.
Fantastic. Well, I want to start off kind of summarizing some thoughts. Jake, you should be proud. I think what you've shared with us is an awesome trajectory of career and technical education growth over the last 3.5 years and beyond. And we're excited about what comes next. I also want to thank you for diving into our strategic plan uniquely by directly talking about Big Six, data point number 6, but also talking about our priorities. You talked about partnerships, and you talked about opportunities, and also our values. You talked about excellence in learning and accountability as well. And specifically with partnerships, I just think back to all of the partnerships that we have in the Valley with the advisory pieces, the worksite learning pieces, and then the classroom partners that you mentioned as well. Like, those are all people that are working with our programs in the Wenatchee School District and working with our students and our teachers directly that are going to help kind of grow this idea of what all do we offer at Wenatchee High School and in our Wenatchee School District Career and Technical Education department to increase enrollment. And board, I really appreciate your lens of how do we look at this from an enrollment standpoint, right? Because that's what we're looking at in our other decisions and our other conversations, is how can we continue to look at the great work that Jake is leading and help it grow and nurture it so that it equates to enrollment later on. So thank you. We appreciate your time and your energy and your passion and your leadership. Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great presentation. There's nothing else. I will adjourn.
Hey, don't be stealing any of that. Dayton.
I know, right? I haven't seen him since he shed his winter lair.
I know.
Just like I saw this clean